I'm very honored to open this day's session with a presentation, and thank you for inviting me to present our practice and experience in the scope of this seminar. As Bela told, my name is Gaby WIJERS and I'm in charge of Lima. Lima is based in Amsterdam, and Lima distributes, preserves and researches media art. Media art archiving and preservation started late 80s, early 90s in the States and Germany. And at the time, the video artworks from the first generation of media artists were starting to decay. In the Netherlands, the first national projects were started at that time by Montevideo and RBK, nowadays called RCE. And followed up by the Netherlands Media Art Institute, the Foundation for the Preservation of Contemporary Art, the SBMK, and Lima. I think unique in the Dutch approach is a national collaborative approach. In preserving and researching media art, a collaborative approach is key. In this environment of continuous changing, not only of technology, but also of the knowledge, cooperation is key to find support and to share your knowledge. And also the Netherlands have a long history in cooperation with Hungary on the subject, with projects as 404 Object Not Found, long time ago. I'm very happy. Yesterday, all the conceptual and theoretical parts were executed, so I can dive in more to the practice and the practice we execute. As we heard and know from our own practice, a lot of work is done, but there's also still a lot of work to be done. And a lot of research is done, and we are working very hard, all of us and other cultural heritage institutes, but digital art is still under-collected, under-counted, under-managed, under-preserved or unpreserved and inaccessible. And this is also why Lima is existing, actually. When the Netherlands Media Art Institute had to stop, and we continued because we believe this is very important to continue the preservation and the knowledge and the cooperation in this field. We are a very young organization, a not-for-profit organization, continuing the work Montevideo and NIMC started. And we are dedicated to media art. We have a media art collection. We don't deal with sculptures. We don't deal with paintings. We only deal with media art. And our goal is to support and promote and encouraging the continuous translation of media art. I like to look at conservation as translation, but I'll come back to that later on. And so we try to translate it every time, to new technology, to new forms, maybe new meanings, but for sure also to new audiences. And in this way, we want to obtain and maintain the sustainable access to media art. We are an independent art organization. We're focusing on 3 tasks. We have conservation services, including a knowledge center on media art preservation and a digital art repository. It's a collective approach. 25 collections in the Netherlands outsource the storage and the maintenance of the media artworks to Lima. These are private collectors, contemporary art museums, academies, the National Media Art Collection, and so on. Next to that, we have, as a distributor, our own collection. Actually, the collection doesn't belong to us. The works belong to the artists. And the artists ask us to promote and present the works worldwide and to preserve the works. And next to that, we research. We do a lot of research in cooperation with museums, artists, cultural heritage institutions, and more. And since the early 90s, we are operating in this preservation field, from the storing and preservation and digitalization of tapes via more attention for equipment preservation into emulating software-based artworks and also researching reinterpretation and documentation as preservation strategies. If this schema looks familiar, that could be because it's based on the Oasis model. But our designers made their own design and put our workflow in this way. We needed to come up with a new workflow. Of course, over time, we always stored, we always made backups, we always did checks. But since the collection and the knowledge is growing, and all is digital, new changes are coming our way, and the systems are changing even faster. And we also heard yesterday already that instead of the 7 to 10 years that all the formats would change in video, nowadays in the digital realm we talk about 3 to 5 years. The formats are changing. And at the moment we take care of 10,000 media artworks and even more documentation on video. And from this 10,000 works, 70% is video, and 30% is, let's say, more complex. It's multiple channel with software components. It's software-based art. It's net art. And of all these artworks, we have multiple formats and with multiple licenses. So we have the artist master or the purchased master. We have archival submasters. We have presentation formats and all the variations they have. And we have fragments and stills to present online. And to give further future access to our collection, we can learn from data management and information science, broadcast archiving, or how film archives deal with their material. These institutions are dealing with similar components, but often centering on the information stored instead of the artwork, artist opinions, and presentation requirements. They also have to deal with a far larger amount of data. They call it big data, and with particular perspectives on copyrights and other IPR issues that are different than we deal with our artworks. It's a different approach, but highly valuable and adaptable. And we all know that in a responsible approach to documentation, presentation, and preservation of media art, it requires gaining an insight into the artist's intention and the significant properties of the artworks and technology used. And there is in no way something that's called one size fits all. For our collection management, we implemented the workflow for digital archiving, the OAS model, Open Archiving Information System. It's a reference system. So if you go into the literature about this workflow, you find many ways how to deal with it. So it's a reference model. You have to fill it in yourself. But it's a known standard, and it's very useful also as a sort of vocabulary to exchange with other institutions. What is not so well listed in the OAS and also not in the picture you see is the pre-ingest. I think most of the work is done at the pre-ingest phase. The it starts with the source, with the artist, and it starts with the works that come in, the recognition of the artwork. Recognition, you can say, is it a channel? Is it documentation? Is it a video? Is it a software-based artwork? What does it need to sustain? Is it a version, or and so on? So Lima advises the museums and the artists in technical and legal matters. So the museums will, or the collections will send in or will acquire works, and they ask us what kind of technical formats. Of course, they not always ask us, but they could. They have an abonnement, so they can use our help desk for all these kind of questions. And when the works come in, we do the identification and we control the works, the quality control. So we check if the work is complete, if it's working well. Works come in many formats. Not all institutions have the proper equipment to test what they bought. So we do that for them. If everything is okay, then it goes into the data management system. If something is not okay, for instance, we have a DVD where we think there could be or there should be a higher quality format, then we go back to the artist or back to the collection and ask them to send us the other formats. Then, of course, with the ingest, we do all these kind of checks with hashtags and more, and also when the works are checked. We have double sets that are stored in separate places, and we check them all once or twice a year, and we then, of course, also do the checks. And here you also see that works come into the collection in multiple formats. This is what institutions buy nowadays. And from this we make an archival package. So older analog video will normalize to uncompressed AVI, but the digital files will preserved or will be stored in its own codec. For sure, Patricia will go more into trustful storage. What we store are the masters, the originals, the archival submasters, so let's say this AVI file on LTO tape. We are now researching LTO7, so that's the newest generation. And as I said, all these formats for presentation and also online presentation, stills and fragments, we store on the not on the cloud, but on the servers. So more than one backup, and one is stored at the Stedelijk Museum, for instance, of this whole collection. And we were discussing now the next step, working together with the iFilm Museum that has a big infrastructure installed, and we see if we can join them. A year ago we had about 300 terabytes to store, and within a year it doubled. And now more and more works come in, also more and more artists send us their works. So we now have to make the decision, either we make our own infrastructure to store it, or we cooperate with the film museum that just had this whole infrastructure installed. So we are negotiating with them and see if our requirements can meet. The slide before was more like tape-based. If we get software-based works or CD-ROMs, then most of the time we make an ISO, a disk image, and store the software. In the case of hardware and software and equipment and technical knowledge, We don't have all the equipment, we don't have all the software and hardware, and we don't have all the knowledge, but we have quite a pool of institutions, collectors, technicians that help us out. And this is very, very valuable. So for the data management of long-term digital objects, it's also including research and development and the history check. So you can see what was the original source where we made, that we used for digitalization. And of course also planning is important. So when do you go to the next step? When will be LTO 9 available, or when will MPEG 4 or MOF not longer be the adequate presentation format? We call it Tech Watch. And also in this Tech Watch we work always together with the international media art community, and also within the Netherlands with the iFilm Museum and the Institute for Sound and Image that has the largest collections. After data management and planning and archival packages and so on, we could talk about access. Our distribution collection means that Lima has the right, the license with the artist to present and promote and preserve these works. So we also can present them online, but of course for all kinds of reasons we use fragments online and stills online, and every curator, or if someone wants to research it or make a program, you can get a login and then you can watch the works full length. Not in the best quality though, but you can watch the work full length online. We are now dealing with some museums like the Stedelijk Museum, the Museum de Halle in Haarlem, the Van Abbe Museum, the governmental collection, to make this kind of access for all the works that are in the repository. And you can imagine how much work that is in mapping all these different issues. That's a whole project on its own, and it's very time consuming but also very valuable, because then researchers could have a look on, then could search crisscross to the different databases and do not have to go to the museum, to the single museums to search for particular artworks. Next to the online access, we also supply all kinds of information or formats for presentations, exhibitions and screenings. So some museums, when they send their works on loan, they ask us to do that for them. So we get in contact with the place where the works are to be presented, talk about on what equipment it will be presented, and then send them the proper files and instructions how to install it. And Lima started 4 years ago. I think in the first year we delivered 1 tape. The rest was 50% on DVD, and the other 50% was file-based with WeTransfer or uploads and downloads. And now at the moment it's totally no DVDs anymore and no tapes. Everyone just wants to have the files. Sometimes requestments for sending them on a memory stick, but most of the times it's all online. But of course some works need extra attention or needs a particular piece of software, so we send them out on small computers or mini-Macs. And of course always with particular presentation specifications. A more detailed, it's not the clearest one though, a more detailed scheme in the workflow for artworks, where you can see in the pre-ingest the questions we ask, and what we do when the works come in, and also the metadata we store and the way we do it in the next steps in the workflow. If you're interested, there is a link online in the project Transformation Digital Art, where there is a whole, I don't know, let's say 20-page text explaining the workflow in exactly every step. So let me know, then I'll send you the URL. In dealing with this workflow over the last years, there were some changes we noticed. Not only that we now send out files instead of tapes, but of course also new requirements. So basically what I mean is to say that such a workflow is never finished. There are always new steps, always new things to take in consideration. For instance, the way we document interactivity was always very basic. It was interactive or not. And nowadays, since we have more and more interactive works, we go to next level in how to describing it. And it's lacking in our database, so we have to supply that. But also, the institutions want to store lots of digital information at one place. So they also ask us if we can store all the documents that are related to the artworks. I showed you a picture of a box that a museum bought with a particular work. They also immediately buy different versions. A version with a subtitle, a DVD, and a digital master. And of course, you all know the sizes of the files are growing, where now we have to deal with 4K and more, and all kinds of other huge files. The native digital-born artworks, most of the time, are not so large, but the new video files are extreme. And we notice far more attention for use and reuse of the information. So we are developing the workflow and the way we work all the time, and looking for how to manage the assets and how to validate versions. And of course, we're looking into emulation and how other repositories are executed. And more looking also at documentation and reinterpretation. And actually, we are based in the pathological anatomical lab of a former hospital, so it's the perfect place for this kind of research. The first larger research we did and finished, let's say, a year ago, was together with some of the Dutch museums and the Foundation for the Conservation of Contemporary Art into the digital artworks of Peter Struijke. Peter is a digital pioneer that started late 60s with digital artworks, and he is one of the Dutch pioneers that has works sold or given to many, many, many museums. So there is some knowledge to share and also some effort to get all these works up and running. I can also send Bela the links, and then you can share it with all of us. In this research, we were also looking very much again and again to emulation. The next research was on reinterpretation. And then reinterpretation as creative act. I'm coming from a documentation background. I have a theater background, and we always described the work, but not so much related to the technology. And also in mediating artworks over time, I think it's worth the effort to see how to mediate the work, not so much looking into the technology, but dive in the field of encouraging artists to do reinterpretations. I know it's not a topic we want to go, or many of us don't want to go, but if you look at the evolution of the preservation strategies after emulation, this is the next one. So we did a research and now we'll start a European project on reinterpretation. Cooperation is key, as I said, and we cooperate at one hand, of course, with the the community, the international media art community, and many of my colleagues are present here, and that's a pleasure. And in the Netherlands, we have this wonderful foundation for the conservation of contemporary art, the SBMK, and where the museums work together in the preservation and conservation of modern art, of contemporary art, I must say. And if you are a member of this foundation, then you can also ask for, then you can bring in an artwork and discuss it with your colleagues, for instance. So we share contracts. The museums can tell their needs, and the foundation will look at all kinds of ways how to solve it. We did together this work with the Transformation Digital Art, but the next project of the Foundation for the Preservation of Contemporary Art is, for instance, about plastics and not about media art. The other cooperation in the Netherlands is the whole field of digital preservation. There's a whole digital infrastructure with royal libraries and national archives and sound and image and others. And we are part of that. We are in this red zone down, in all of them actually, but not as a separate entity. And they also, we are supported by this network, and we join all kinds of projects, for instance on CD-ROM archiving, but also in research in how the different institutions deal with the workflow. You want to make it's online. You can find all these publications online. The current research that we now are in the second phase. We presented the first results in February, is the project Future Proof, together with Geert Mul, a well-known Dutch media artist. So we work with museums, we work with the national digital infrastructure, and we work a lot with artists. Within Future Proof, of course, we preserve and find ways how to make a script and to reinstall the works of Geert Mul. There was a major exhibition in Schiedam, Stedelijk Museum Schiedam. The exhibition will now go to Dortmund and will be open the 19th of May over there. And this is a perfect opportunity to check all the installations instructions we made and so on. I highlight this picture because also in this project we make guidelines and checklists for artists how to archive their media artworks. So starting at the source, the artist. And then, of course, there's a lot next to the research and documentation and all the work we do on artwork documentation packages. We also do a lot of education, presentations at seminars that are very valuable to get in touch with everyone again and see what research and projects are done, and at symposia under the title Transformation Digital Art. Thank you.